Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of Open to Interpretation. My name is Iraida, and I'm the director and trainer here at Language Liaisons. For those of you that don't know, we are a language services agency that specializes in providing certified and qualified interpreters in any community setting. We do this online, on-site, and telephonically. We also have a translations department, a tutoring department, and an interpreter training department. Speaking of training, a few weeks ago, we finished our first ever 40-hour online interpreting training session, and it was quite the accomplishment. The first class that went through it did an amazing job. So kudos to you if you're watching us. You did a great job again. But during that time, we were honored and privileged to have a special guest join us. His name is Matt Mudaris, and he is an Arabic interpreter, master interpreter at CHOP, and he has lots of experience as well. He came in to talk to us just about his journey as an interpreter, how he got to where he is right now. We discussed a little bit of the differences between working as a staff interpreter versus working as a freelancer. And then he also did a medical terminology session for us later on. We thought it would be great to share that chat with you today, and that's why we're doing a Facebook premiere instead of doing a Facebook Live. But you can still feel free to leave comments and leave questions below. We would love to engage with you in that way, and we hope you enjoy the chat.
Matt, do you want to greet everyone first?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. Sabah al khair. Buenos dias a todos. It's a real treat to be among the wonderful group of professionals, your lovely, beautiful, ambitious faces. I'm really honored to be here with you guys.
Great. Thank you, Matt. So, Matt, let's just start by having you tell us a little bit about just your journey, right? How did you become an interpreter, and how are you who you are today? How did you get to this point?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I started working as a translator at the beginning when I'm originally from Baghdad, Iraq. So I worked as a translator for the Iraqi TV station. And then after the war in 2003, I worked in the US Embassy as an interpreter. I was working on a program called IBTIB, which is Iraqi Police Transitional Integrated Program, where you interpret. There was an American instructor, and you interpret for them. But when I moved to Philadelphia in 2009, and I resettled in Philadelphia, if I go back a little bit, I moved to Jordan, and I stayed 4 years there with my family. And unfortunately, my father passed away in Jordan in 2006, and it was very difficult. Although, I know the language and I know the culture, but it's difficult because so many things could be different at the same time. And so when I was in Philadelphia, I volunteered for the refugee clinic at the beginning, and I immediately fell in love with the profession because you can see the building bridges, if you may, between the provider and between the patient. And I think that moment when you see the appreciation in someone's eyes is precious. So that's when I, started working, joining many companies on freelance basis at the beginning. And to be honest with you, I took the BTG and I took lots of training. But before taking the BTG, which is really, I don't know if you're familiar with the BTG, it's really the basic, bridging the gap for medical interpreters. It's language neutral, and it's really the basic first step. But before taking the BTG, I felt with the knowledge that I have, that I'm a strong interpreter, I can do this. But when I took the training, I realized that I'm a student of the game, and still am. After 15 plus years of working in medical interpreting settings, I still feel that our profession is, with every single encounter, you're going to learn something new. The moment we stop learning as interpreters is the moment we fail. Because there's always new breakthroughs, there's always new technologies, there's new terminology. And language is something live that changes. So we have to keep abreast with not just with medical terminology, but with with the jargon, with the slang of the languages or the language pairs we interpret into and from. And so then I had one assignment at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And the moment I set foot in the hospital, it did not feel like a hospital at all. It did not smell like a hospital. It did not look like a hospital. It just looked like a playground for children. And I fell in love with that, and I applied, and I got accepted, and I've been working ever since then in at Children's Hospital Philadelphia as a medical interpreter and trainer. So that's in short my journey.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing. I don't know if anybody has had the opportunity to visit CHOP, but I have had to take my children there for certain things before. And it really is like whenever I say, hey guys, we have to go to CHOP, it's not like, oh no, I'm going to the hospital. It's like, CHOP, let's go. Like they just think of it as like a more fun place. It's like a mini Disney World almost, right? Like everything is so lively and so colorful, and everyone is just so nice to the children, and just they really do know how to engage with children patients. And so, Matt, can you talk a little bit about, because you mentioned your BTG, your bridging the gap training, and that is, like you said, it is the basic training for community interpreting, medical interpreting in general. Now, going into a pediatric environment, how did you have to adjust your training to fit your new patients?
That's a great question. Thank you so much for that. I think, I am an advocate for diversifying. Although for pediatrics, I think the key is to be honest. I always say sincerity shows and hard work shows. And so again, with every single encounter you tend to learn. I actually keep a word log for all the terminology that I get exposed to with every
Mm,
single encounter.
that's great.
And I think repetition and practice, practice, practice. That's the key to to succeed really. Because believe it or not, on one occasion I got stuck on the word shoulder. How easy is that? How difficult
Shoulder.
is it to interpret shoulder? But because they say in language, you use it or lose it, and that's why
Mm,
you have to keep abreast with the medical terminology. I always carry with me the Blue Dictionary or glossary, and there's many resources nowadays, so there's really no excuse but to do the right thing. Take
mhm,
advantage of training, and the very fact that you guys are here, you guys and ladies are here today attending this training despite all the fluid situation with COVID-19 speaks really volumes about you. But on the other hand, again, there's really no excuse to learn, because nowadays we have webinars, we have online training, we have, and one of the things that I noticed during COVID-19 is the generosity of so many
mm.
professionals providing training and providing advice, providing mentorship, despite the obstacles that we are facing. So uh, I would say that continue learning every single day and be sincere.
Yes.
And I want to mention only one small example. When I joined CHOP, we didn't have really a pleasant relationship with oncology department, just because oncology is one of the departments where they never turn away patients, right? It's a walk-in
Right.
clinic. So
Okay.
so when you have you will have very busy schedules all the time. It's back to back. And for in the Arabic culture, it's a very relaxed culture when it comes to the approach of time, right? They have Arabs, generally speaking, have a very
Hmm.
relaxed approach to time. And so if their appointment is at 9 a.m., they could show up at 11 a.m. And we know that's difficult because sometimes we have back to back. So at the beginning, we had little bit of problems with oncology because, for instance, the interpreter would be scheduled for 2 hours, but they would wait and wait and wait and wait without interpreting really, or the actual interpreting would be 5 to 10 minutes. What I did is, and it was a risk. I'm not saying you could or should do that all the time. I had the privilege of being a staff interpreter, so I'm in a sense I'm part of the system, right?
Right.
Uh, the moment a patient shows and the provider is ready, I'll jump to that session, even if I'm scheduled with another provider, but the patient is not there or the provider is not ready.
Mm.
And sometimes providers would say, I'll be there in 5 minutes, but those 5 minutes we know, because their time is very valuable, could take 30 minutes already.
Mhm.
And at the beginning, I was facing problems because of that. But at the same time, I was transparent with with the leadership, telling my manager, I'm going to get paid either way. If I wait for a session and not interpret, or if I jump in and help elsewhere, I'm going to get
Right.
paid either way. But,
Right.
you know, you created this difference where people see how keen you are to provide the services you want. And nowadays we get from oncology departments all sorts of sweets and cakes because of that. Of course, it's a
Yes.
collective effort. It's not just me, but what I mean is, sincerity always shows.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And actually, today we'll be diving into cultural mediation a little bit more. And I just love that you brought up that cultural example of how we, how we as interpreters, especially when you're in a staff interpreter situation, you can come up with ideas and ways to maybe not completely integrate the culture, but work with the culture, right? And figure out how can we compromise here and have a common ground, right? Where we could work together and partner without needing either party to change 100%, right? Because we want our patients and our families to be comfortable and to be who they are. And there's no way that you can have an excellent patient experience if you're not allowing them to be who they have been raised and brought up to be, right? So I love that you brought that up today, Matt. Thank you. And Matt, can you tell me a little bit about the differences between working as a staff interpreter and as a freelance interpreter? And we are going to talk a whole lot more about um, just the overall differences later this week. But just from your perspective, having done both, can you tell me maybe like a pro and a con for each, and what were some of the best things as for you as a freelance interpreter that you found, and some of the better things as a staff interpreter? Can you speak to that,
Yeah,
please?
absolutely. I really love your questions. I'm really enjoying my time here. Um, so I guess first it really depends on where you see yourself. For me, I was well, to start with, and I'm going to be completely honest. With being a freelancer, you get paid more money. Generally speaking.
Mhm.
However, that could shift. Nowadays, many companies and many hospitals are shifting towards virtual, and I don't see this, disappearing anytime soon. I think this is the
Right.
new norm that we need to get used to. But that also means, in a sense, that competition has increased because you may find interpreters from other states joining, trying to interpret for you and so on. So I was saying, I guess it depends on where you see yourself. For the freelance world, I think the most precious thing is you learn and you diversify lots of terminology, right? So you're not just stuck in pediatrics. You go to the pediatrics, you go to a mental health institution, you're in a school doing an evaluation, you're in gynecology. So you learn more diverse medical terminology. And I'm going to be honest with you, I made a promise to myself when I came to the US. I was told that with the language, with the expertise I have, I'm going to easily find a job. And that was not true at all. For 3 entire months, I was knocking door to door looking for a job. At the beginning, I really literally thought I'm going to die of hunger because I wouldn't find a job. And so I ended up with 3 part-time jobs as a in produce department, and then as a receptionist, and also at Penn University as an annotator. But I guess the point I want to make is my advice is to diversify, and freelance gives you that chance to
Yes.
diversify and to not just diversify, but create a reputation and name for yourself where many institutions and many providers and many language companies would seek your expertise. So I think with freelance world, you get to diversify a lot and you get to network, and that's a very important part in our profession. Also, you kind of manage your time, so you can choose to accept or apologize for taking assignments based on your own time.
Mhm.
However, when it comes to advocating, and I know you're going to talk about the roles of interpreters later on, and we know that advocating is really a very tricky situation. You can advocate and you're supposed to, but it's really the most invasive. So
Yeah.
the moment you end advocating, you have to switch back to your role as being the conduit. So advocating is really a tricky area where you don't want to step on anyone's foot, right? You have to be very careful. But at the same time, being a full-time staff interpreter allowed me to advocate for the patients, because otherwise, as a freelancer, I wouldn't have the same, I guess, uh, I wouldn't have the same power. I wouldn't have the
Mm.
same, even access to information. Like for me, it's very easy being a staff interpreter. I have access to the full profile of the patient. So
Mm.
beforehand, if I have a scheduled appointment, I'm not walking in blind. And you develop relationships with the providers. You can ask for, information. Maybe you can ask for clarification in the pre-session, but it's way easier when you're a staff interpreter because, the providers know you and you know the providers, and you can ask, you have access to all kinds of information related to the patient. You even know, you get used to the patients and you get used to the providers. This provider, for instance, uh, you know, tends to talk a lot. This provider speaks in very short sentences. This family speaks English, and or they think they speak English, and they, for the first half an hour, they speak English, and all of a sudden, with a very simple word, they turn to you and say, "What did they say?" And that's why I always say interpreting is like driving. The moment you take your eyes off the road, something disastrous could happen. You
Mm,
have to pay
mhm.
attention all the time, even if it's, even if it's what you think it's a boring session and they are, back and forth, you're really interpreting only a few words, but you have to have your full attention to the session. uh, for staff, as I said, you have more access to information. But I love the freelance, and that's why I never left the freelance world. I still freelance in many settings because that's the way you diversify. And again, if I'm going to give advice, my advice for you to navigate and explore, what your strengths are through diversifying your clients.
That's great. Thank you, Matt. You covered so much with that answer and you gave such insight. Thank you for that. And I have another question for you because not every day in the interpreting profession is an easy day, right? There are days where you are unfortunately interpreting for some pretty heartbreaking situations, and so we end up experiencing some of that even though we are not the trauma or the illness is not happening to us. We are still a part of the communication that's happening, and you're being the one processing and giving those messages. Can you tell us a little bit about vicarious trauma and how you deal with that as an interpreter?
Indeed, I think the first thing is to acknowledge that this is quite real and it does exist. That even if you're not the person that's being, going through a procedure or lost a loved one, or you're interpreting for a session where there's, for instance, sexual abuse or domestic violence, it will get to you. So you have to realize and acknowledge the symptoms that that might show. You might feel
Yeah.
burnt out. You might feel sad. You might lose appetite. You might lose focus, and you have to take good care of yourself in order of taking care of others. And really like this differs from one person to another. It depends on, some person would have the first key is acknowledging it, and what works for you doesn't necessarily works for others. For me personally, when I'm in a very difficult situation where it's really heartbreaking, I know that, as trainers, we say you cannot get really attached to the patient, and uh, maybe some even argue that you're not supposed to show emotions, but I actually am with that. As long as you're keeping you're professional, you're staying professional.
Mm,
We are human beings, so I don't
yeah.
see it as a big problem showing your emotions, because I personally have ended up in a situation where I was literally tearing up, and
Mm,
that's very difficult, but I continue the session either way. So I think we are human beings, and it's okay to show your emotions as long as you're not hindering, the flow of the session. That's not what we want to do. And so for me, when I'm feeling really bad of an interpreting session, really heartbreaking news, for me, I would love watching movies, especially American movies. I would love to try a number of cheeses. I love cheese. I would want to spend quality time with my family. Anything that would,
yes.
like kind of refresh your mind and make you ready for the next challenge or the next session.
Mhm.
Also knowing that, you are making difference in these people's lives. I remember in an end
Yes.
of life situation for an international family, I ended up, tearing up, and but I never stopped interpreting. I continued interpreting even though I felt pain in my throat, but I went on. And I remember the father, before leaving, telling one of my coworkers, "I'm gonna never forget that interpreter," because again and
Mm,
again, guys and ladies, sincerity does show. I guess that's the advice I would give to, what do you enjoy? What would help you, overcome this situation, try it.
Yes. So good. So good. Thank you for sharing all of that, Matt. And being really aware. I think that that is key for all areas of interpreting. We just finished discussing unconscious bias and what it looks like to take the time to self-examine that. And so I think that awareness of self in general is incredibly important as an interpreter. You may have thought that you have already healed from a specific experience that you had that maybe brought you pain or sadness in your life. And then who knows, maybe 7, 8, 9 years later, you find yourself interpreting for that same experience, right? That same type of an encounter. And this actually happened to me. And when I finished interpreting, I was able to get through it. I did what I had to do, but I left the hospital, I got in my car, and I just cried. And I was like, wow, this happened 8 years ago. I lost a loved one to cancer over 8 years ago. And I had interpreted in the cancer center for oncology many, many times after, but this was different. And it was that end of life. And the family, they were having a hard time understanding that there was nothing else that they could do. So we had to reiterate and explain that in different ways. And so by the time that we were finished, I had taken it all in. I really had. So I got in the car and I just cried. I let it all out. But knowing yourself and finding what is the thing that gets me out of that, right? So I took a few moments, and I believe in prayer. So I prayed, and then I drove straight to my house, and I just wanted to see my kids laughing and giggling and saying their silly jokes. And so that took care of it for me, right? Another very well-known and expert interpreter in our field here, especially in our local region, always says, just remember that it's not your journey, right? As much as you're involved in these hard situations, it's still not your journey. So you've been allowed the opportunity to be a part of that journey for just a few moments, sometimes just an hour. Sometimes you walk with the patient and the family for more than that, but sometimes it's just a short time, and yet you can still so easily carry that with you when you leave the encounter. So just remembering, okay, I'm grateful for the opportunity. I'm grateful that I was able to help in some way, like Matt just said. And then remembering, let me go back to my journey now, right? And differentiating that there are two journeys here. That was another piece of advice when it came to vicarious trauma that I'll never forget. So, Matt, thank you so much for just the wealth of information that you've shared in the last, 20, 25 minutes.
Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of that video. Thank you, Matt, once again for being a part of our training session and for allowing us to use that part of your teaching for Open to Interpretation. He went on to talk to us about medical terminology. He is a licensed medical terminology trainer as well. And so he helped out with teaching that to our students, and it was just an amazing time together. We hope that you enjoyed this. Again, if you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. Feel free to reach out anytime. And it is December, so Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to all of you. We hope you have a great and a safe time with your families. Stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you.